The news of Jimmy Cliff's passing did not arrive like a shout. It came like a quiet tremor, spreading through Jamaica's hills and the world's musical memory, dissolving into a silence so heavy it felt alive. People across continents heard the announcement and froze, as if time briefly stepped aside to make room for grief. It wasn't simply that James Chambers, the man the world called Jimmy Cliff, had died at 81 after pneumonia. It was the realization that a pillar of an entire genre, one of the first men to teach reggae how to speak to the world, had finally taken his last bow. And strangely, the story of his life never feels like it should end with a sentence about death. Because everything he touched, songs, films, cultures, still pulses with a kind of defiant breath that refuses to lie still. Long before the name Jimmy Cliff bathed itself in global applause, before audiences in Africa, Europe, North America, and the Caribbean would chant his lyrics like scripture, there was only a child named James Chambers wandering through the sleepy village of Somerton Street, James Parish. Somerton had no electricity when he was born on July 30, 1944. Its nights were thick with the softer rhythms of crickets, the murmur of farmers coming home late, the echo of hymns escaping from wooden churches. His earliest musical encounters were not crafted in polished studios, but in those dim, mellow gatherings where mento musicians plucked real stories out of string instruments and church choirs raised their voices toward heaven with no concern for fame, only sincerity. His father, a strict, devout Taylor farmer, noticed early that his son's voice held a kind of startling purity. By 6, James was already a tiny marvel. People from neighboring villages began slipping quietly into the church just to hear the child sing, as if witnessing a miracle unfolding in the body of a boy who didn't yet understand what destiny had begun stirring inside him. Electricity eventually crept into Somerton, and with it came a transistor radio. That radio transformed his world. Suddenly, nights were filled with the smoky textures of Sam Cooke, Ray Charles, Fats Domino, voices reaching him from faraway continents through fragile radio waves. The young boy listened with an almost feverish devotion. He didn't simply hear these performers, he studied them, absorbed their phrasing, their emotion, their audacity. The radio became a portal, and the child who once sang for farmers and church women began dreaming of something larger. A life built on music, not merely lived in it. But dreams were luxuries in those days, and when he finished 6th grade, his father sent him to Kingston to learn a trade at Kingston Technical School. Kingston in the early 1960s was a different universe from the calm hills of Somerton. It was loud, chaotic, unforgiving, but it thrummed with a promise James recognized instantly. He stayed with an aunt and uncle in a cramped one-room dwelling in Denhamtown, a place wired with the energy of Trenchtown's cultural furnace. Each morning, he walked to school, and that journey threaded through Orange Street, Beach Street, as people called it, home to studios, record shops, and clusters of ambitious youths leaning against zinc fences, waiting for miracles. Watching these young dreamers hardened something within him. Music wasn't just a possibility here, it was a fire burning on every corner. He began haunting studios, knocking on doors, begging producers for a chance. Most brushed him aside. He entered talent shows, fell short, tried again. Eventually, he found his way into the informal musical classes run by Joe Higgs, the Trenchtown sage, whose guidance helped shape the Wailers, Judy Mowat, the Wailing Souls, and countless others. Under Joe Higgs' mentorship, James sharpened his craft, learned breath control, improved his storytelling. Still, no producer bit, not yet. Then, destiny intervened on an ordinary walk home. It was 1962. James, still a schoolboy, wandered past 135 Orange Street and saw a combined restaurant and record shop named Beverly's. A wild idea hit him. If he wrote a song about Beverly's, maybe they would pay him for it. He dashed off the lyrics in 10 minutes, marched inside, past the counter, and demanded to sing for the owners, the Kong brothers. 2 of the 3 brothers laughed at the skinny boy. But Leslie Kong, hearing the voice, froze. He knew greatness when he heard it. That impulsive performance changed music history. Leslie Kong took him to Federal Records. 3 tracks were recorded: Dearest Beverly, Miss Jamaica, and the one that truly cracked open the door, Hurricane Hattie. Inspired by a storm that had battered the Caribbean, the song shot to #1 across Jamaica. Overnight, James Chambers became Jimmy Cliff, a new star with fire in his throat. During that period, one ordinary day produced an encounter that would reshape global music in ways none of the boys involved could have predicted. Jimmy visited his friend Desmond Decker, another Beverly's artist. Desmond worked as a welder, and when Jimmy stopped by, another young welder stepped forward, quiet, observant, carrying the scent of ambition. His name was Robert Nesta Bob Marley, though people called him Robbie or Bob. Bob Marley told Jimmy Cliff he wanted to enter the music business. Jimmy listened, heard potential in the young man's voice, and invited him to audition at Beverly's. When Bob Marley sang for him, Jimmy Cliff recognized something powerful. He convinced Leslie Kong to give the youth studio time. From that decision came Marley's first recorded single titled One Cup of Coffee. Years later, when people would debate who the true king of reggae was, they rarely remembered that Jimmy Cliff had been the one who first cleared Marley's path to the studio microphone. From 1962 onward, Jimmy Cliff's ascent seemed unstoppable. Record after record on Beverly's label turned into street anthems. By the mid-1960s, he was such a national sensation that the Jamaican Ministry of Social Welfare selected him to join the delegation representing the nation at the 1964 World's Fair in New York. His performance at the festival set reporters buzzing, and one man in the audience, young British-Jamaican entrepreneur Chris Blackwell, felt electrified. After the show, Chris Blackwell approached him with an offer: join Island Records and conquer the world. Jimmy Cliff trusted Blackwell partly because they shared Jamaican roots. He accepted. Island Records flew him to London, but their initial strategy was misguided. They tried packaging Jimmy Cliff as something like a British Jimi Hendrix, a rock-styled figure wrapped in psychedelic flamboyance. It didn't suit him. The debut album, Hard Road to Travel, failed to spark. The frustration weighed heavily. Seeking clarity, Jimmy embarked on a tour of Brazil. That journey altered everything. The Brazilian crowds adored him, embraced reggae's early pulse with unexpected intensity. Reinvigorated, he returned to Jamaica in 1969, after 4 years away, reconnecting with Leslie Kong. The reunion rekindled old magic. Drawing from every disappointment, every lesson, every homesick ache of the years abroad, he created the album Jimmy Cliff. This was not merely a record, it was a revelation. His songs, Many Rivers to Cross, Vietnam, Wonderful World, Beautiful People, felt like veins carrying the blood of an entire people. Vietnam struck so deeply that Bob Dylan declared it the greatest protest song he had ever heard. Suddenly, reggae wasn't just Jamaican anymore, it was global. And Jimmy Cliff was its messenger. His next album, Goodbye Yesterday, climbed even higher, mixing covers like Wild World with inspirational anthems such as You Can Get It If You Really Want. When he traveled, crowds erupted. He had turned reggae from a local flame into an international blaze. Then came the film that changed everything. Director Perry Henzell had been seeking the right face, the right posture, the right spirit for the lead role in his gritty feature about Jamaican life and music. When he saw the album cover of Jimmy Cliff, something clicked. He knew instantly that Cliff was his man. The film became The Harder They Come, and Jimmy Cliff embodied Ivanhoe Martin, the country youth pursuing musical dreams only to be crushed by the industry's corruption, forced into outlaw notoriety. The film exploded beyond expectation. Released in 1972, it won awards across Europe. And more importantly, it brought Jamaica its slang, its fashion, its street culture, its struggles to cinema screens across the world. But the soundtrack was a cultural detonation. The Harder They Come, You Can Get It If You Really Want, Many Rivers to Cross, Sitting in Limbo. These were not just songs. They became doors through which the world entered reggae for the first time with true understanding. Many argue that the film more than any single album in history, is what made reggae a global movement. Yet, behind the accolades, trouble brewed. Jimmy Cliff felt increasingly constrained under Island Records. He wanted faster progress, more creative freedom, better promotion. Chris Blackwell begged him to stay, promising a massive plan that would elevate him into superstardom, but frustration and the lure of other labels offering large sums finally pushed Jimmy toward EMI Records. He accepted their offer and walked away from Island. 2 weeks later, only 2 weeks, Bob Marley, Bunny Wailer, and Peter Tosh walked into Island's office. Chris Blackwell, needing a new flagship act after Jimmy Cliff's departure, poured the promotional resources he had once prepared for Cliff into the Wailers. The result was Catch a Fire, then Burnin', and the ascent of Bob Marley into the stratosphere of music history. It is one of the great ironies of reggae that Jimmy Cliff discovered Bob Marley, opened the studio doors for him, yet by leaving Island, unintentionally cleared the runway for Marley to become the global icon Cliff himself had once seemed destined to be. But Jimmy Cliff didn't crumble. He surged forward. His first EMI album, Unlimited, declared his independence with authority. Then came House of Exile in 1974, a project that resonated powerfully across the African continent. Nigeria in particular embraced Jimmy Cliff with a passion rivaling Jamaica's own. When he toured the country, venues overflowed. Crowds poured into the streets, and his music became a soundtrack for youth movements grappling with national, political, and spiritual awakenings. House of Exile contained a blistering track called The #1 Ripoff Man, a thinly veiled jab on Chris Blackwell. The rift between them had become a scar across reggae history. Jimmy Cliff's presence in Africa grew even more monumental when he performed in Soweto during the steel-hard days of apartheid. The audience was integrated illegally. Black and white South Africans stood side by side, defying brutal laws to experience his music in unity. Among that crowd was a young boy named Lucky Dube. The experience changed him. It set him on the path to become Africa's greatest reggae star. Jimmy Cliff did not just create music, he awakened musical destinies. The 1980s continued with relentless productivity. In 1986, Jimmy Cliff won his first Grammy for Cliffhanger, an album carrying the sparkling, dance-lit track, Hot Shot. His sound evolved constantly, refusing to remain in a single genre box. Purists sometimes grumbled, claiming he strayed too far from the reggae core. But Cliff believed creativity must breathe freely, must roam, must experiment. He had been a pioneer too long to become a prisoner of expectation. By the early 1990s, his output slowed, but his relevance never dimmed. The world rediscovered him through soundtrack hits. His 1993 cover of I Can See Clearly Now for the film Cool Runnings became an international phenomenon, reasserting his brilliance for a new generation. Then came Hakuna Matata for Disney's The Lion King in 1995. Another hit that introduced his voice to millions of children around the globe. Record labels lined up again, wanting a piece of his resurgence. Island Records, recognizing the irony and the value, re-signed him. The album Higher and Higher arrived in 1996, reaffirming Jimmy Cliff's enduring command over melody and message. But fans who longed for the purest reggae roots had one more surprise waiting. In 2012, Jimmy Cliff unleashed the album Rebirth, a deep dive into classic reggae textures, raw, emotional, unfiltered. It earned him another Grammy and soothed the purists who had spent decades begging him to revisit the original spirit he helped create. The album title was fitting. It was a rebirth not simply of his sound, but of his relationship with the entire reggae community. Into the late 2010 seconds and early 2020 seconds, Jimmy Cliff continued to perform, his voice weathered but still golden. He had been on stage somewhere, somehow, for nearly 70 years. Few musicians anywhere in the world could match that span of influence, relevance, and dynamism. And then, in November 11, 2025, silence. The world awakened to the announcement that Jimmy Cliff was gone. Pneumonia had snatched away a man who had outlived generations of musicians, activists, politicians, and peers. Tributes began pouring in from presidents, prime ministers, activists, cultural icons, and ordinary men and women whose lives his music had quietly shaped. In Jamaica, radio stations played his catalog from sunrise to midnight. In Nigeria, fans gathered in Lagos and Abuja to sing "Many Rivers to Cross," the song that had meant so much to them for so many decades. In South Africa, Lucky Dube's family issued a statement calling Jimmy Cliff the father of African reggae spirit. Even in Brazil, thousands left flowers at the sites where he once performed, honoring the man who first carried reggae into their hearts. For many, the most painful truth was this: reggae had lost one of its architects, not just a participant. Before Bob Marley became the global face of the genre, there was already Jimmy Cliff. Before reggae learned to command stages in London, New York, Lagos, or Tokyo, Jimmy Cliff had already been there, singing in accents that carried Jamaica in every syllable. Before commentators spoke about reggae's golden age, scholars joke that reggae history was divided into before Cliff and after Cliff. It may have been humor, but like all good humor, it hid a deeper truth. Jimmy Cliff was the first man to drag reggae out of Jamaica's neighborhoods and place it on the world stage with radiance and defiance. He broke open the gate that others, including Marley, would later walk through. His songs carried the realities of the marginalized long before the genre officially adopted social consciousness as its main voice. His acting in The Harder They Come forced the world to see Jamaica not as an exotic postcard, but as a place of struggle, creativity, danger, aspiration, and resilience. His touring reshaped continents. His mentorship helped birth legends. His persistence showed what artistic bravery looked like. And so, when he died, grief was not confined to Jamaica. It rippled across oceans because Jimmy Cliff did not belong to one place. He belonged to everyone, touched by the quiet courage of refusing to give up, by the defiant message in his voice that insisted, again and again, that you can get it if you really want, but you must try, and try. As the world now reflects on his 81 years, one truth stands clear above all others. Jimmy Cliff was not merely a king of reggae. He was one of its architects, its teachers, its warriors, its dreamers. He was a man who took the humble melody of a small island and expanded it into a universal language. He was a bridge between eras and between cultures. And though the news of his death may leave our hearts heavy, his music remains a kind of eternal sunrise, arriving again every morning, whispering to the world that hope is stubborn, dreams are powerful, and the rivers we cross might be many, but they are never impossible. The legacy of James Chambers will continue to live wherever people lift their voices against hardship, wherever communities cling to joy, wherever nations find strength in rhythm, and wherever a child in a small village hears a melody and suddenly realizes the world is bigger than they imagined. Jimmy Cliff walked through life as a vessel for greatness. And greatness, when shared with the world, never dies. Now it is your turn to speak. Which Jimmy Cliff song carried you through the hardest season of your life? Which moment from his story in this video shocked you the most? Did you always see him as reggae's first true king? Or has this documentary changed your mind? Drop your answers in the comments and share your own Jimmy Cliff memories in detail. Let this comment section become an archive of stories the world must not forget. Follow this channel for more powerful reggae stories, deep dives into the icons behind the music, and documentaries that go beyond the headlines. Your follow and your comment today help keep Jimmy Cliff's legacy alive for the next generation.